This is TWiT.
Why are people sticking with Windows?
This
7?
I've got to hear. I'm baffled.
Yeah. An interesting bit of research by ZDNet caught my eye. ZDNet noticed that these days, nearly 10% of their website's visitors were still running Windows 7 more than 5 years after the release of Windows 10. And as we all know, despite Microsoft's extreme efforts to force everyone onto Windows 10. Ed Bott, who grew up through the birth of the PC like the rest of us old-timers, he's, you and I, Leo, know Ed's name well.
Oh, he's on TWiT all the time. He was just on a couple of weeks ago. We love him.
Yep, and he's been in the industry forever.
Oh, yeah.
Notice that their server logs were showing this and set up the poll. So the poll setup read, statistically speaking, this is Ed, 1 in 11 people reading this post on a PC are running Windows 7. That's not speculation or guesswork. That's what the ZDNet server logs for the last 90 days say. Some 85.8% of the many millions of PC-based visitors to this site are running Windows 10. Of the remainder, 9.2% are running Windows 7, which is twice as many as the Windows 8 and 8.1 population. That data lines up pretty closely to public data from the United States government's massive digital analytics program, which measures visits to more than 400 websites run by the federal government. Over the same 3-month period, their mix of traffic from PCs consisted of 85.9, that's virtually the same, Windows 10, 10.0 Windows 7, and 3.7 Windows 8. That's a fairly significant drop from the last snapshot I looked at, which counted Windows 7's share of visitors at 18.9% in the 90 days leading up to that operating system's July 14th, 2020 end of support deadline. And then he references an article from then. So he says the glass half full crowd says it's a good thing that half the population has stopped using Windows 7 in the 9 months since Microsoft ended support for it. He says, but I'm curious why so many are continuing to use Windows 7 past its expiration date. Rather than speculate, I put together a poll. Thanks to the more than, it's 3,200, not 38, as I said. Thanks to the more than 3,200 people who responded, I'll share the results next week. Well, that was a week ago. Now we have the results. He posted yesterday on ZDNet. He said, our ZDNet poll drew more than 3,200 replies, along with 50 or so emails. The results are fascinating. Let's start with the 2 easiest questions. Do you plan to upgrade to Windows 10 in the next 12 months? The answer to this question was pretty emphatic. Just under 58% replied no, with another 27 answering, not sure. Only 16% said yeah. He says, several respondents pinned the blame for the slow upgrade on corporate IT departments, with 2 respondents saying that the COVID-19 response had caused issues with completing upgrades within their organization. Others pointed to IT departments that are understaffed and incompetent and taking their time.
That's so cool. Rude to say, well, it's because I have an incompetent IT department.
They're not that good. We all wish we had Windows 10, but we're still stuck with this old horse.
Rude.
He says, in all, roughly 1% of respondents specifically mentioned that they were prohibited from upgrading because they were using a company PC and not a personal device. Don't you touch that. It's working just fine. Okay, next question. Are you paying for extended support? That is, has your Windows 7 support not actually ended? He says, although Microsoft has stopped releasing monthly updates to the general public, those updates are still available for those, which bugs me, for those who purchase extended security updates, ESUs. He says they're not cheap, and they're not and they get progressively more expensive, as we know, every year. And they're not easy for small businesses to acquire. He says, as I noted at the beginning of this year, because earlier he wrote a piece titled, "You Want to Keep Running Windows 7? Good luck with that, small businesses." Anyway, he says perhaps that explains why only 6% of poll responders said they are paying for ESUs, with another 3% admitting they're not sure. The remaining 91% are apparently going without. And, that's the camp I'm in. I'm going without. I'm sitting in front of Windows 7 right now. Works great. He said in the longer responses, some people took pains to note that their Windows 7 machines aren't connected to the internet. Okay. Others pointed out that they had up-to-date security software. Yes. And a few said they thought Microsoft was exaggerating the threat posed by running unsupported software in a bid to squeeze more company out of customers. Fair enough. Okay, so big third question. What is the main reason you have not upgraded? Ed says, here's where things got interesting. The original survey contained 4 choices in a box labeled and a box labeled other, where respondents could fill in their own answers. Nearly 1,000 people chose other and then wrote in their reason. He says, I read every one of those responses and categorized them manually. About 10% of the responses could not be categorized because the reason was indecipherable or irrelevant. That left a total of 2,855 usable responses. So, out of a universe of 2,855 usable responses, here's how they broke down. And this I found really interesting. 42% said compatibility. The number one reason people are sticking with Windows 7, Ed says there's no contest. Compatibility issues, hardware and software, wins in a landslide. Fully 40% of respondents chose that answer, and another 2% or so selected other and then identified a compatibility issue. The specifics include some esoteric equipment, including one person with a legacy CNC milling machine, computerized numerical control milling machine, plenty of old peripherals that don't have Windows 10 drivers, and several people who paid for Adobe Creative Suite perpetual licenses and have no desire to upgrade. He said among the write-in responses, the biggest group was made up of fans of Windows Media Center, who collectively added up to roughly 1.5% of respondents. He said their loyalty is impressive. Okay, 42% compatibility, number one. Number two, a third, 32%, don't want to upgrade. He said about 17% of respondents chose the ready-made, just don't feel like upgrading answer from the poll form. But I counted nearly the same number of people who chose the other box and then made it clear from their reply that they had picked Windows 7 over its logical successor, Windows 10. I sorted those replies into 4 buckets in the following order. People who just don't like Windows 10 made up the biggest chunk of respondents. People called out the user interface, bugs, and stability in particular. About 1 in 4 of the I don't like Windows 10 group used strong enough language that I created a separate Windows 10 sucks category. Many used that exact phrase, while others threw in overheated words like garbage, crap, dumpster fire, and a few choice phrases that I can't repeat here. In all, those first 2 groups added up to about 10% of total responses. A slightly smaller camp had no particular problem with Windows 10, but preferred Windows 7. Just under half of this group.
You influenced a lot of that previous group.
Yeah.
You know, Steve Gibson says it's a polished turd, so that's why. That's all you need to know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Anyway, go ahead. Then there's another group.
Just under half this group praised Windows 7 because, quote, it just works.
Yeah, or not.
A slightly larger group said they believe Windows 7 is better than Windows 10. They praised the user interface, quote, much more user-friendly, or the last usable version. Yeah.
You know, all of that's legit. It's not that it's not legit, right?
Yeah.
It's just that it's insecure.
Yeah, it works. Works great. And called out Windows 7 for its stability. I mean, look at what this year has been about. Windows 10 disaster after disaster after disaster.
Yeah.
My printer, I can't print anymore. I just lost all of my programs and documents. They're all gone. You know what? Anyway.
Did you feel like that's worse with 10 than it was with 7? It feels like it, but I don't remember specifically, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It seems worse.
I don't remember that with 7. No. You know, 7 was mostly sort of a refrosted XP.
Right.
So, they weren't really trying to do that much to
Maybe
it.
That's it. Yeah.
They've really gone crazy with Windows 10. Anyway, so he said a word that appeared over and over again was control, especially in the context of security updates. He says more on that in a minute. He says, in all, it seems appropriate that the two groups of Windows 7 fans added up to about 7% of the survey respondents. And then in something curious, 10% said upgrade is too expensive. And Ed wrote, I was surprised that so many people chose that option, especially when the Windows 10 upgrade is free. The most poignant example came from a reader in Iran who said, in Iran, we have a bad situation, and the cost of the upgrade was too high. Okay. 5% said updates are too intrusive. He said an unsurprising number of people expressed their extreme displeasure with forced updates, buggy updates, and the feature churn with twice yearly feature updates. Quote, I've never had to reinstall an OS due to a borked update, said one respondent, and quote, quote, that seems to be a regular occurrence with Win 10. Continuing the theme of loss of control, another person said, I own my computer and I will decide when to update, not Microsoft. And then down at 3% was privacy, telemetry, and spying. He says, I was just a bit surprised that this number was so low. But what they lacked in numbers, this group made up for in, well, let's just call it passion, using multiple variations of the word spying as well as privacy to express their discontent for Microsoft's telemetry, which is apparently a dirty word. Another 1% or so specifically called out the word trust, and a handful described their hatred for Microsoft using language that my editors would be extremely displeased to see me repeat on this website. And he said, perhaps the best response in this group was this one. This is, in all caps, Big Brother, brother. Finally, 3% were afraid to upgrade, can't upgrade, too busy. Ed wrote, not everyone who responded to the survey was dismissive of the idea of upgrading. A significant number of people said they were afraid to upgrade because they worried they would lose data or programs in the process. This category also included people who said they were just too busy to upgrade or that they couldn't afford the time to reinstall programs and reconfigure system preferences. About a third of the responses in this group, that would be down at 1%, said their hardware was too old to upgrade or that they had tried and failed. But my favorite reply was a single word, just in quotes, laziness. Okay.
Fair enough.
3% had training and support issues. He said, honestly, I expected this group of responses to be bigger, but it looks like like most corporate customers aren't particularly worried about users being able to adapt to change. And finally, the least frequently cited reason at 1%. Okay, so what would that be? That would be shy of 300 of the respondents said, I'm moving to Linux. And Ed said, and finally, it just wouldn't feel right if I ignored the handful of respondents. Oops, no. So less than 1%. He said 24 to be exact, who said they either have switched to Linux or just about to do so. So anyway, looking over those numbers, I was surprised that 42% cited compatibility issues. Ed mentioned some old, CNC equipment whose drivers were unsupported by Windows 10. And I think that probably we think too often of Windows systems in the generic desktop role, desktop workstation role. But for example, my dentist's office is still using Windows 7 for its patient records management, and the app that runs the digital X-ray machine and displays the digital X-ray images, I note, is hosted on Windows 7. Who knows whether that would run on Windows 10, and I'm sure they're not wondering. It's a case of if it's not broke, don't fix. So even if compatibility were not an issue, it could also fall into the 32% who just don't want to upgrade. It's like, it's running just fine. And one advantage of using Windows 7 for non-desktop applications, like that, the X-ray machine, is that Microsoft cannot force the system to upgrade or else. I certainly do find much to agree about with those users who say, this is my computer, darn it, I'll decide what software it runs and when. So anyway, I guess someday that attitude will be considered quaint. And I should just note, I'm now, freely using two machines. Today I use Windows 7 and Windows 10 every day, a different workstation in each of my two sites. I'm sitting in front of a Windows 7 machine here. In the evenings, I use Windows 10. And what I think will eventually happen is that Windows 7 will become too old, and things that I want will not be available for it. That's what happened with XP. Both Mozilla and Google had refused to continue updating their browsers just because I was still using Windows XP. Otherwise it was a perfectly functioning OS. And of course, IE had died on it ages ago. And as it happens, just last night, I wanted to install the Calm Radio app for background ambient music while I'm working. The Windows 7 app is nowhere to be found. Now it's Windows 8 and 10 only. So as it happens, I ran it on iOS, which worked just fine. But, I'm sure at some point I will rebuild this Windows 7 machine when it just becomes too old, when the things I want to do with it are no longer available on it. And then I'll move to Windows 10, and I have experience with it now. I'm using it in the evenings. And right now I've got Windows Defender, which is getting, is keeping itself current and keeping an eye on the system. And all my browsers, Firefox and Chrome are both being updated, as is Edge. So, I'm good for the time being. And I know, Leo, you're sort of in Linux, right? Or is that where you are now?
Yeah, Linux and Mac. I don't actually have any Windows machines at this point. I should, and I'll probably find one somewhere. But yeah, I don't have any Windows 7.
I know what's going to happen is somebody will finally put it on some really tasty hardware that you have to have.
Yeah,
and so that'll.
So what happens is I buy. In fact, there's like, although I'm waiting for Apple Silicon, but there's like a new HP Elite, which they're beautiful computers. But what ends up happening is I buy the Windows machine and put Linux on it. After about 6 weeks with Windows, I go, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah, I know.
I can't. I'm surprised that you've survived, but you have to, right? You have to.
Well, and frankly, the developer tools, that's really one of the things that Microsoft really got right in the beginning. They created some world-class developer tools for Windows, and I also I'm for the work on SpinRite and Beyond Recall. That's still DOS,
right?
And then soon it will be UEFI with no DOS,
right?
But so I really do. It's just better for me to be developing on Windows.
I don't know. Emacs with assembly is pretty good. You should really consider it. I'm just saying. I know. You're still using Brief, right?
No, I had to give it up. It was 16 bits.
Oh,
yeah, and I'm glad I made the switch. Although I am Visual Studio 2008, so I'm staying as old as I can.
Visual Studio is pretty nice. I actually use even on Linux or Mac. I use Microsoft's open source VS Code, which is kind of a simplified Visual Studio, and I really like it. I use it all the time. I'm using it right now. I'm studying Haskell, and it's a very Haskell. The hardest thing about Haskell, the reason I've kind of turned my back on it, is the tooling is so nuts. It's just crazy. It's not anything like, it's not like you write a text file and you compile it. It's much more complicated than that. And finally, the Haskell community has finally addressed that. There's a very good VS Code plugin. GHC Up is a very easy way to install it. And so, tooling, I completely agree with you. Tooling is 99% of it, even I'm sure for assembler. If you've got the right tools, then the job is a lot easier. Debugging, testing. How do you test? That's the other thing. Do you have some sort of test harness for hard drives, or how do you examine hard drive behavior?
So the first thing I did when I returned to this project was to create a development environment that would be comfortable.
There you go.
And so because I'm DOS hosted, I had a weird problem with Windows 10 because the DOS Samba client, Windows file and printer sharing, was so old for DOS that it didn't do the encryption that Windows 10 was insisting upon.
Oh, so it couldn't read the drive.
So I fought with that. But now what I have is I have a side-by-side, or actually Oracle's VirtualBox. I'm able to bring up a VirtualBox VM.
Yeah.
It's networked into the network, so it's able to see my development directory. So I'm able to run the debugger. I'm using Soft Ice, which was the best debugger back in the day. So I've got Soft Ice on DOS, and so I can just hit G and enter, and immediately I'm in the code. The debugger pulls the source from the Windows directory, so I'm doing source level assembler debugging, able to single step and watch the stack and all the registers and all that, but actually running in DOS. And so some of the things I can do there, some of the actual hardware stuff, I need to use an external machine. So I have there an external box that boots FreeDOS, same network stack, in order so that it can see into my Windows directory, and then I just have a freestanding DOS machine. So, having a comfortable development environment, since I plan to be doing this full time now for the foreseeable future, that's the first thing I needed to establish.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, that's another kind of
and
tooling.
It's not easy because this stuff's getting so old.
Well, then so are we, Steve. So
yeah, we'll all fade at about the same time.
Better not fade. Keep going, Steve Gibson.
I figure I got another 20 years in me.
That's good. I like hearing that.